The most dangerous employee in any building is not the loudest one. It is not the most skilled one. It is not even the highest paid one. The most dangerous employee is the one who can say no without their life collapsing. It is 4:47 in the afternoon. You are already packing your bag in your head. Your manager walks over or sends the message or finds you in the hallway and adds another project to your plate. HR will later describe it as a growth opportunity. Your rent is due in 3 days. Your credit card minimum cleared on Monday and left the account looking thin. Your child's school fee is sitting in a folder on the kitchen table. The car has been making that sound again. In a sane world, you would say, "This is not in my role." But the sentence that actually arrives in your mouth is, "Sure, no problem." Because the question in your body, the one nobody trains you to notice, was never about the project. It was, "Can I afford to have a backbone today?" That is the question this video is about. Because here is what most financial advice refuses to admit. The reason your job has power over you is not because your boss is intimidating. It is not because you are weak. It is not because you lack confidence. It is because every part of your life has been routed through a single paycheck. Your rent answers to that paycheck. Your debt answers to that paycheck. Your insurance answers to that paycheck. Your family obligations answer to that paycheck. Your sense of who you are, in a lot of cases, also answers to that paycheck. Once a system controls all of those inputs at the same time, it does not need to threaten you. It just needs to exist. Your bills do the threatening on its behalf. Your employer does not need you to love your job. They do not even need you to respect them. They just need your bills to be loud enough that you hesitate before you push back. That hesitation is what the system is counting on. That hesitation is the product. So we are not doing budgeting today. We are not doing coffee, coupons, or hustle culture. We are not doing start a business and leave the matrix. You have heard those videos. They are recycled. We are doing something older and uglier and more useful. The financial rebellion every smart employee should start. And the rebellion is not about getting rich. It is about becoming harder to control. First, set the definition. This is not recklessness. It is not quitting tomorrow. It is not refusing to work. It is not the glossy escape fantasy social media is selling, the beach laptop, the passive income, the early retirement timeline a 26-year-old invented during a layoff. That is marketing. We are doing something colder and more permanent than that. The private resistance a working adult builds so that their job stops being the only thing standing between them and collapse. The job stops being the only door. The job stops being the only oxygen tank. The job stops being the only source of food, shelter, status, and self-worth at the same time. Every other section in this video flows from that one move. A worker with breathing room behaves differently. They document differently. They negotiate differently. They respond to disrespect differently. They sleep differently. They do not explode. They do not beg. They do not absorb things that should never have been theirs to absorb. They think. And thinking inside a system that runs on panic is its own act of defiance. The first stage of freedom is not being rich. The first stage of freedom is the first time your manager sends a threatening email and your stomach does not drop because rent is due on Friday. Before you can build anything, you have to see the chains clearly. And there's not just one chain. There are 5, and they tighten in sequence. First, your paycheck controls your survival. Then, your lifestyle controls your decisions. Then, your debt controls your personality. Then, your title controls your identity. Then, your comfort controls your imagination. By the time the last chain is on, the worker has stopped noticing they are wearing any. The first is the paycheck chain. One income funds everything. The employee may hate the job. The employee may dream about leaving every morning during the commute. But that paycheck is the only bridge between normal life and disaster. And the bridge is exactly one missed deposit wide. Watch what happens to a person on a Friday morning when payroll is delayed by 6 hours. They refresh the banking app every 2 minutes. They reread the message from their bank. They mentally calculate which direct debit will fail first and who they will have to text first. That is not a bank problem. That is the chain showing itself. The second is the debt chain. Debt does not stay in your bank account. Debt walks into meetings with you. It changes your posture. It changes the tone of your emails. It changes the things you let slide. The employee who sat through that condescending comment in last Tuesday's meeting did not let it go because they are mature. They let it go because every flinch costs money they do not have. People discover they cannot speak up at work and assume they are cowards. They are not cowards. They are leveraged. There is a difference. The third is the lifestyle chain. The apartment that used to feel like an upgrade now feels like a contract. The car payment that used to feel like a reward now feels like a leash. The wardrobe, the school fees, the holidays your family expects, the version of yourself you accidentally agreed to maintain, none of it scales down easily. You are no longer just paying for life. You are paying to be the person you already told everyone you are. Leaving the job means dismantling that person. Most people would rather suffer than dismantle. The fourth is the benefits chain, and this one disguises itself well. Health insurance, retirement matching, paid leave, predictable schedules, a loan facility through the company, school fee discounts in some sectors. They look like generosity. They function as handcuffs. The worker stays in a job that is grinding them down because their child's medication runs through that employer's plan. That is not loyalty. That is hostage logic dressed in HR language. The system is engineered so that walking away from a damaging environment feels irresponsible. That is not an accident. That is the design. The fifth and the deepest is the identity chain. The title becomes proof that the employee is somebody. The company name becomes part of their self-worth. The role becomes the line they put under their name at weddings, on LinkedIn, in family group chats. Leaving the job does not just feel financially scary. It feels like deleting a version of the self. And when those two traps work at the same time, the financial one and the identity one, the employer no longer has to manage anyone. The employee manages themselves on the company's behalf, for free, 24 hours a day. The trap is not always that you cannot afford to leave. Sometimes the trap is that you cannot imagine who you are without the job. Most of the time, it is both. This is why standard budgeting advice fails working adults. Standard budgeting asks the wrong question. It asks, where did your money go? That is a polite question. It is a clerical question. It treats your finances like a receipt to be filed. A rebellious budget asks something colder. It asks, which of these expenses are making me easier to control? This is not a sermon against pleasure. There are expenses that protect your health, your family, your rest, your dignity. Those are not the enemy. The enemy is the expense that looks like comfort and behaves like captivity. The car payment that makes you terrified of losing income. The lease upgrade that turns your job into something closer to a hostage situation. The subscriptions you stopped using last year and are too embarrassed to cancel. The social spending you do because you do not want certain people to know how tired you actually are. The family obligations you took on because saying no felt impossible, even though you can no longer afford to say yes. A lot of these expenses started as coping. A draining job creates expensive coping habits. Food delivery on Wednesday night because cooking after that meeting was unthinkable. Retail at midnight on Sunday because the package on the doorstep on Tuesday is the only thing this week you control. Weekend escapes you cannot really afford because the alternative is sitting in the apartment that reminds you of Monday morning. None of this makes anyone stupid. Exhaustion wants relief. But if the coping mechanism keeps you financially tied to the thing exhausting you, the system has closed the loop. You are now paying to survive the job that is paying you to survive it. That is the cleanest definition of a trap that exists. A rebellious budget is not about hating pleasure. It is about refusing to fund your own captivity. Which brings us to the resistance fund. And forget the phrase emergency fund for a moment, because the standard definition is too small for what we are doing. An emergency fund protects you from a flat tire or a broken laptop. A resistance fund protects something more important than your possessions. A resistance fund protects your decision making. It is the reason you can say, "Can you send that request in writing?" It is the reason you can stop answering messages at midnight without feeling sick about it on Monday. It is the reason you can report a pattern instead of apologizing for noticing it. It is the reason you can refuse the temporary extra duties that became permanent 6 months ago. It is the reason you can sit across from HR without begging them to believe you. It is the reason you can interview elsewhere without the desperation that recruiters can smell through a screen. It is the reason you can survive a period of retaliation long enough to move on your timing, not someone else's. A resistance fund is stored courage. That is its real function. The savings account is just where it lives. Build it in stages because vague targets are useless. The first stage is one paycheck of breathing room, just one. That alone changes how a person sits in a meeting. The second stage is one full month of survival expenses, not your full lifestyle, your survival number, rent or mortgage, food, utilities, transport, medication, minimum debt payments, insurance, childcare, family essentials. Strip everything else from the calculation. You need to know what your life actually costs when it is not performing for anyone. The third stage is 3 months of that same survival number. The fourth, if your industry is unstable, your workplace is toxic, your household depends only on you, or your job market is slow, is 6 months. This will not feel like freedom for a long time. It will feel like discipline. It will feel like sacrifice. It will feel like watching other people enjoy themselves while you say no to things you used to say yes to. But the first time you have enough money to survive a bad manager's threat without your body going into fight or flight, you understand something no motivational speaker can explain to you. Breathing room is more powerful than ambition. It is more powerful than confidence. It is, in a lot of cases, more powerful than competence. Because competence without breathing room is just talent in handcuffs. Once the resistance fund starts forming, the next move is colder. Look at your monthly outgoings the way an analyst looks at a business and ask which of them are not actually bills. Some of them are votes. Some of them are obedience contracts that arrive every 30 days. Your manager does not need to raise his voice. He knows the car note is already screaming. He knows the lease renewed last month. He knows the credit card minimum just took the last clean breath out of your account. So when he says, "We need you to be flexible this weekend," he is not asking the employee in front of him. He is asking every bill standing behind that employee, and the bills always say yes. This is not about shame. Real obligations exist. Some fixed expenses are necessary. Some are responsible. Some protect a household in ways that should not be touched. But some are fear wearing better clothes, pride that signed a contract, comparison that bought a bigger version of something it never needed, the phone plan upgraded because a colleague did, the car financed because a wedding was coming, the apartment costing an extra $500 a month because of a view you stopped looking at by the third week. Private resistance means shrinking the expenses that make you afraid to move, not overnight, not perfectly, not in a way that punishes your family, but deliberately. One renegotiated contract at a time, one downgrade you refuse to be embarrassed about, one honest conversation with a family member about what is actually sustainable. Every unnecessary fixed cost you cut weakens your employer's grip on you without their permission. They do not get a memo. They just notice over time that you have stopped flinching. This brings us to raises, and this is where most workers lose the war they thought they were winning. A raise feels like a victory. It often is not, because raises arrive at the exact moment a person is most psychologically vulnerable to making the cage more expensive. The body has been starving for a sign that the suffering meant something, and the raise feels like that sign. So the apartment becomes bigger, the car becomes nicer, the subscriptions multiply, the eating out becomes a habit instead of a treat. The family contribution increases because someone on the group chat saw the LinkedIn announcement and started expecting more. 6 months later, the worker is making more money than they have ever made in their life, and they are exactly as afraid to lose the job as they were before, sometimes more afraid. Because now the cost of losing it is higher. The raise did not free anyone, it just refinanced the cage with better materials. A raise is not automatically progress. A raise becomes progress only when it reduces dependency. Read that twice. When your income rises, your dependency should fall. That is the only rule that matters, and almost nobody follows it. Every raise should be divided before it lands. A portion for an honest improvement in quality of life, because joy is not the enemy, captivity is. A portion for the resistance fund until it is fully funded. A portion for high-interest debt, because debt is the loudest creditor of your behavior. A portion for future mobility, training, certifications, tools, network. A portion you simply enjoy without guilt. A raise is only a raise if it increases your options. Otherwise, it is just a bigger paycheck inside the same building, and the building has new amenities. Amenities are not freedom. Amenities are how systems convince intelligent people that comfort is the same as power. Now we get to the number your employer hopes you never calculate. Most workers never do. Most operate on a foggy emotional sense of someday I will leave that never materializes because it was never a real plan. It was a feeling pretending to be a strategy. The walkaway number is the amount of money you need in liquid savings to leave this job without panic. Not comfortably, not permanently, without panic. That is a much lower bar than people assume, and that lower bar is the entire point. A toxic job wants your fear to feel infinite. A walkaway number makes it measurable. Before the number, the job feels like life itself. After the number, the job becomes a math problem. That conversion is the single most disorienting thing that can happen inside a controlled employee. Because once your fear is finite, the employer's leverage has a ceiling for the first time. Instead of saying, I want to get out eventually, you say, my walkaway number is 8,000 or 12,000 or 3 months of survival expenses plus job search costs plus a small buffer for the unexpected. Whatever it is written down, not in your head, written down, recalculated every 6 months as life changes. Include survival expenses for however many months your industry takes to rehire someone at your level. Include job search costs, travel, certifications, interview wardrobe if your field demands one, possibly relocation. Include an emergency buffer because emergencies do not pause during career transitions. They accelerate the moment income disappears. When you have the number, 3 things happen. Fear becomes math. Resentment becomes a target. Vague dissatisfaction becomes a measurable distance you can close month by month. You stop fantasizing about leaving and start engineering it. You stop arguing with management in your head and start ignoring them in real life. Because you know exactly how many months stand between you and the exit door. You do not need to quit today. You need to know the number that would make leaving possible. The day you have that number, your job stops being a sentence and starts being a contract you are reviewing. Debt deserves its own section because debt is a different kind of chain. It does not only affect your finances, it starts running your personality at work, and most people inside it do not realize it is happening. Debt can make a confident employee agreeable. It can make a skilled employee tolerate things they were never trained to tolerate. It can make a sharp negotiator soft. It can make a person who knows their worth accept a number well below it. It can make the same employee who used to push back in meetings sit there now and smile at jokes they hate because the laughter is cheaper than the silence. This is not a moral failing. It is a math equation expressing itself through human behavior. When a percentage of your future income is already owed to someone else, your ability to take career risk drops. Your tolerance for mistreatment rises, not because you have changed as a person, but because the math has changed underneath you. The person who can absorb a missed payment behaves differently from the person who cannot. Be careful here. Not all debt is destructive. Some debt is strategic. Education that pays itself back. Housing that builds an asset. Business financing with a real return path. Planned, structured debt can have a function, but debt becomes dangerous when it starts making career decisions for you. When you take the assignment you should have refused, stay in the role you should have left, accept the pay you should have negotiated, because the alternative is missing a payment. The debt is not yours anymore. You belong to it. High-interest consumer debt is the most aggressive version of this. It converts past stress into present obedience. It follows you into every meeting. It sits with you during every negotiation. It whispers when you want to push back. Debt is not just something you owe. It can become something you obey. Reducing it is one of the most underrated political acts a working adult can perform. The financial half is the easier half. The harder half is psychological, because a lot of workers are not only financially dependent on the employer, they are emotionally dependent. And nobody talks about this honestly. Some people cannot leave the job because they already told everyone the job proved they made it. They posted the announcement, they updated LinkedIn, the likes came in, the aunties shared it. They became the successful cousin. They became the one who quote unquote works at a good company. They became the person their parents brag about at gatherings, the one their old classmates respect because of the logo at the end of their email signature. The role stopped being a job and became a piece of evidence in a long, unspoken case they were making about their own worth. Now leaving feels like withdrawing the evidence. It feels like a public humiliation in a courtroom where they were finally winning. So they stay. They absorb things. They explain away patterns. They accept underpayment because leaving would feel internally like a downgrade in personhood. They accept disrespect because the title still sounds good when their cousin asks what they do. They accept burnout because the company name still impresses certain people at parties. Some people are not trapped by poverty. They are trapped by the version of themselves they are trying to perform, and that version is more expensive than rent. The defiance here is colder than it sounds. It involves remembering that your job is something you do, not the full measurement of who you are. Your paycheck is real, but it is not your identity. Your title may describe your role, but it does not define your value as a human being. The company can pay you. It should not own your self-concept. The moment those two things separate inside you, the building's grip on you loosens, even when nothing else has changed yet. The grip was never really about the salary, it was about the story. The next layer is making sure your future is not stored inside one company's memory. A lot of valuable workers are only valuable on the inside. Their manager knows they are useful, their team relies on them, the department would buckle without them. But the outside market has no evidence of any of this. Their results live in internal reports nobody else will ever read. This is dangerous because if your value only exists in one company's records, that company sets the price. They are the only buyer. There is no auction. There is no competition for your future. And when there is no competition for your future, you are not really being paid for your work. You are being paid the lowest amount that keeps you from leaving. Read that line again. The lowest amount that keeps you from leaving. That is the actual math being run on you. The fix is not glamorous. Skill upgrades that travel across employers, a resume updated more than once a decade, salary research that reflects your market, not your manager's preferences, a working relationship with 2 or 3 recruiters in your field, a professional network you maintain when you do not need it so that it exists when you do, a private record of your achievements with numbers attached, visibility outside the building, even a small amount, so your name circulates beyond the people who already employ you. Every one of these moves is another buyer in the room, and another buyer changes the price. Outside income can help here, but a second income without discipline becomes a second treadmill, and you end up exhausted in 2 systems instead of 1. The real point is not earning more. It is making sure every extra dollar weakens your dependency instead of upgrading your cage. Your employer should never be the only place where your value has a price tag. Once that price tag exists in multiple places, the dynamic of your career changes permanently. You stop asking for raises and start declining offers. That is a different posture entirely. And this is where the deepest version of the trap lives. Because the version most people fall into is not poverty, it is comfortable dependency. A decent salary, decent benefits, a familiar routine, a respectable title, a draining but manageable job, a lifestyle that looks stable from the outside, friends who say you are doing well, family that stopped worrying, but underneath you already know what you cannot do. You cannot leave. You cannot push back without calculating the cost. You cannot survive a long gap. You cannot afford to seriously offend the wrong person. You cannot rest, not real rest. Just pause. That is not freedom. That is captivity with good lighting. This is what your financial defense is for. Looking successful is not the same as being safe. Having a good job is not the same as having leverage. Having benefits is not the same as having freedom. Having a raise is not the same as making progress. Having a title is not the same as having power. Having comfort is not the same as having options. Those distinctions used to be obvious. The system spent the last 40 years blurring them on purpose. The rebellion is not loud. From the outside, it looks like almost nothing. Someone saving a little more than they used to. Someone cutting an expense their friends did not notice they had. Someone paying down a balance. Someone updating a resume on a Sunday afternoon. Someone calculating a walk-away number on the back of an envelope. Someone refusing to upgrade their apartment after a raise. Someone separating, one slow degree at a time, who they are from what they do. None of it looks like resistance. All of it is, because every one of those moves reduces fear, and fear is the only thing keeping a lot of these systems running. A working population without fear is the one thing no exploitative structure can survive. Your rebellion does not begin the day you quit. Most rebellions never end in a quit at all. Your rebellion begins the moment your money stops serving your fear and starts protecting your options. Because the day your bills stop negotiating against you, your employer is no longer managing a desperate person. They are dealing with an adult who has options. And that is the kind of employee every bad system in the world is afraid of.